The selection of the vines themselves is going to be different in one vintage compared to another, depending on whether it was a dry vintage or a more humid vintage or hotter vintage. It'll make a difference in this selection. And then what the technique in the vines for this wine involves is after selection of the field and the individual vines is harvest of for the Chianti Classico, taking every cluster off of the vines except one, and then that one cluster is allowed to ripen for an additional week or 10 days, and it's those clusters that are harvested separately for the production of this wine. But not all those clusters make it all the way through the selection process, because then the wines are made from those clusters, and they're in individual containers, they're in individual barrels, and those blocks or those lots are evaluated ultimately, and some will go into the Chianti Classico again, just as a lot of the clusters on those vines went in. But some exceptional ones will be selected for Casasilia. So it's really the cream of the cream of the cream.
Is it just the tasting that determines that, or is it like, do you do measurements like acidity or like?
We of course do measurements.
You're ready to go too.
But we want to make wines good for the palate, not for the fact sheet.
Yep.
So having the measurements help us to understand certain developments, but in the end, the guiding principle is the palate. So the tasting is the thing. And also at the end, we want to recognize the selection that we do by then applying for the Gran Selezione. So in the Chianti Classico area, there's different quality tiers. The highest one is Gran Selezione. And so once we are ready to bottle the wine, we have to contact the consortium and exactly tell them which tanks contain that wine. So they'll then show up unannounced and they'll take samples from that tank. They'll bring it back to the consortium, and there will be a panel tasting where there's different experts from our wine area, and they won't know it's our wine that's applying for the Gran Selezione, but then that panel will have to come to the conclusion, okay, this wine fulfills the requirements, not technically, because that's like easy to say like, okay, we are allowed to buy any grapes, it should be Sangiovese, so that's the technical side, but really there's a tasting component where experts from our area will say, okay, this is what we expect the Gran Selezione to be. And only once that is passed, we're then allowed to call it Gran Selezione, and then we get these neck labels for the Gran Selezione.